Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar in a series of monthly webinars for managing brokers and associate brokers. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is scheduled for an hour, but we may be briefer than that. We'll try and get through our agenda just as efficiently as we can. Your microphones have been muted, but that's not because we don't want to hear from you. If you do have a question, please use the Q&A function to ask that question. Not the chat, but the Q&A. You'll see them both at the bottom of your screen. We will try our best to answer just as many questions as we can after the presenters have finished. Finally, today's webinar is being recorded. Next slide, please, Sandra. So first, let me introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Carmen Defoy. I'm the Manager of Practice Education in BCFSA's Education Department. You actually won't be hearing much from me today. Instead, it's a pleasure for me to welcome a number of speakers joining us in today's webinar. You'll see them on your screen there. Next slide, please. So the agenda for today is an introduction from CEO Blair Morrison, a discussion with Shanice Power on regulatory services and upcoming educational offerings, information from Bruce McCubry regarding the market conduct team, my apologies, updates to the hearing process and the changes to the real estate services rules numbering. And finally, you'll hear from Sarah Lusk, the Director of Communications with information on the new team, upcoming projects, and information on the BCFSA website. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Blair.
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I am pleased to be here. I plan to be out and talking to all the boards as well as these forums over the next couple of months. I did do the Greater Vancouver Real Estate Board yesterday. So for those of you who were able to participate in that, there may be some duplication. There will be duplication, so I apologize. For those of you who are not in that board, don't worry. I plan to come and see everyone as we go through the next couple of months. I have about 20 minutes, so I'm going to keep my eye on the clock. So about 11:20, 11:25, I will I will need to step away, but that won't, as Carmen mentioned, if there's questions, if there's things we need to follow up on, I'd be pleased to do that. We will be pleased to do that. And as I said, the dialogue and the conversation is important to us. I love seeing the weather reports from all across the province, so it's good to see mostly a sunny day and people are energized by the weather. So can I have the next slide, please? So I'm gonna start with a journey that is really complete at some level as of today. So I want to talk a little bit about the BCFSA Today, the BC Financial Services Authority, and what we do today. And then I'll talk a little bit about a journey. I'll talk a little bit about what it means from a real estate perspective, what we plan as a regulator to focus on. And then as Carmen said, some of my colleagues are here to provide some of the details in terms of where we go. Today, we are the integrated regulator of BC's financial service sector. A couple of keywords there is integrated. So the transactions that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about in a couple minutes were designed by the government, by the Ministry of Finance, to create a regulator that is looking at the entire sector. And the sector is a broad one, and it is one that drives a significant part of this province's gross domestic product, GDP, and it also is a sector that engages individuals in some of the most important decisions they will have in their lives. We have approximately 350 team members based in Vancouver and Victoria. We are still, of course, following all COVID protocols, and we have a budget of about approximately $60 million. So when you think of the areas of regulation, the parts of the financial service sector that BCFSA regulates, credit unions, provincially registered, insurance and trust companies, those both provincially registered and who do business here, pension plans, so that's BC pension plans, mortgage brokers, and also real estate services, obviously the focus of the team here today. BCFSA is also accountable for administering the credit union deposit regime in the province, which is run through CUDIC, the Credit Union Deposit Insurance Corporation. So that's BCFSA Today. And if we go to the next slide, please, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a journey. And I'll give you a little bit of code names or project names, just so I can, in case I slip into the vernacular, you can still follow me. BCFSA has essentially been under project work since 2019. And the first major project that was focused on was the Crown Transition Project. And that was the project that brought FICOM, which was previously part of the Ministry of Finance, and transitioned it outside of core government into an independent Crown agency. So BCFSA assumed all of the accountabilities of FICOM. So back then it was pension plans, credit unions, insurance companies, trust companies, and mortgage brokers. For those of you who may or may not have heard of FICOM, it was subject to challenge. The challenges that organization faced were documented by the Auditor General, documented in other reports. And the desire to bring it out of core government was to put it in a better position to become this modern, efficient, and effective regulator that BC needs for the financial services sector. Those words, modern, efficient, effective, were given to us by then Minister Carol James, and they've been sort of a little bit of our broad guideposts as we move forward. Those mean different things to different people, and that's okay. It's about the conversation. It's about the dialogue in terms of where we want to be. So in terms of what I think modern, efficient, effective is, it's a regulator that's transparent. It's a regulator that's clear in its intent. It's a regulator that is knowledge-based and data-based. It's a regulator that engages and as appropriate becomes that effective regulator that the sector needs. The other transaction that's referenced on this slide is the One FSR, so the One Financial Services Regulator project. And that project was announced all of 11 days after FICOM became BCFSA and became the independent Crown agency. And that was the integration of the Real Estate Council of BC and the Office of the Superintendent of Real Estate into BCFSA. At that time, the ministry, the government talked about a single regulatory model, again, a theme there, integrated and looking at the complete financial service sector. These transactions, these projects are complicated because the entities we're talking about are statutory. So there is legislation in place that covers all of these entities. And if you make a change, if you turn a direction, all those statutes need to get amended. And that involves the whole legislative process, first reading, second reading, third reading. It involves drafters. It involves regulations that come afterwards to make the laws come into effect. It is a lengthy process, and there are a number of parties involved. We had our time with this project, the pandemic, the election, but all in all, when we hit 2021, the government, did put this on the front burner and pushed it through, let it go through the process. And officially, the integration was completed on August the 1st of 2021. Now, when we talk about the integration complete, I think we talk about the integration or the completion of the project. The journey that BCFSA is on, the journey that the council is on, the journey that the Office of the Superintendent is on, doesn't end on August the 1st. We want to continue to, and we need to and have to continue to push forward to become that modern, efficient, effective regulator to, again, make sure that we're clear in intent, communicative, open, but that as a sector, where our areas of focus are, and you'll know the implications of that focus. So again, that's a little timeline, but if you want to think of an organization, this is an organization that's in transition, and there have been, as you have all faced, a tremendous amount of challenges over the last couple of years, but the organization has, I think, become much stronger, much more stable, and is ready to work on and achieve and deliver on its mandate. So can we give them the next slide, please? So I want to talk to you a little bit about where we are today and what that means and where our progress and where our focus is. So as I said, 1FSR was completed on August the 1st. And these are some keywords that we'll come back to. These are keywords that you should hear out of a lot of people's mouths as we talk about the journey. So it's a centralized expertise within one organization. Consumer protection. It is clear that this government's mandate and its direction to us, again, we are a Crown agency, we are independent, we have our own board, but our shareholder is the government, is the Ministry of Finance. And it sets out the larger, big picture policy. And as a Crown agency, we then deliver against that. Consumer protection is key. It is very key for this government. It is not going away, and it will continue to be part of BCFSA's core mandate to ensure consumer protection. Again, remember, these kinds of transactions that individuals do in the financial service sector, buying a home, deciding to retire, taking out insurance to ensure that it's available in the event of loss, deciding where to deposit your money, getting a loan. All of these things are very, very important and often the most important decisions that an individual in British Columbians can face. And the consumer protection of that is very important. Again, those buzzwords, I'll call them, but those guideposts: modern, efficient, effective. We are focused on innovation and enhanced information sharing. I know there's a great amount of dialogue that has occurred in the past between the real estate sector, the real estate industry, and the regulator, and we plan to continue that and make sure we do what is appropriate for the entire sector in terms of that communication. We will be innovating. We are investing in the way we do work. A lot of people call that a tech investment, but I'd like to call it an investment in changing the way we work. Less paper, more data, more knowledge, and making it, quite frankly, easier for you to deal with us. So reducing paper, reducing PDFs, reducing the whole, the complications of dealing with us. We are on a multi-year project. We've just completed stage 1, which impacted the mortgage brokers. We are heading into stage 2, which will change and improve the way real estate licensees deal with this in terms of renewals. More to come on that, obviously, and lots of information to be shared, but that is something that you will see in the next year, next 8, 9, 10 months, in terms of where we're going with making it easier for you to deal with us, and then making it easier for us to take that information and be a better regulator. We promise, as I said, or we committed to purposeful and proactive regulation. Again, I think there's going to be good dialogue, but there will always be differences. Sometimes we won't agree, and that's okay. I think it's important to have that dialogue and that conversation and understand perspectives. But ultimately, there are 31 flavors of ice cream at Baskin-Robbins, and sometimes reasonable, rational people have different sides of an issue. We are looking at integrating the investigations and enforcement. Again, when I look at the sector here in British Columbia and I look at the real estate licensees and professionals, I'm not looking at it as a industry that is fraught with bad actors. I think the vast majority of the individuals here are hardworking, honest, want to do the right thing by their clients, by themselves, want to follow the rules. But it's clear from input from all of you, it's clear from input from the government, it's clear from input from other participants that we need to do better on the timely and effectiveness of investigations and ultimately enforcements. So bringing together OSRI and RecBC under one roof clearly simplifies accountability. There's no one agency that's doing licensed and unlicensed. There's no, the ability to share information has greatly improved. The bottom line is we want to help instill confidence in the marketplace. And I think, confidence comes from a number of places. Safety and stability when you're talking about financial institutions, but it also has, comes from a regulator that is in place, is effective, including dealing with, the bad actors that may exist. We do want to move to that more proactive risk-based regulation. We do not have unlimited resources, as you all don't either. So we're going to try to focus on the things that are most important and the highest risk. And you're going to hear from us on that. One thing we did the past 2 years with the sector that we did regulate, and we will do with the real estate sector as part of the larger financial services industry, is we will issue a roadmap, and we will tell you where we're going. We will tell you what we are going to be regulating and proposing to regulate. We'll talk about which guidelines or directions we're going to come. Of course, COVID is a curveball that may occur in the future, and we'll adjust. But again, we want to be a regulator that its path is clear. We're communicating to the sector, and all of you can decide where you want to put your scarce resources in terms of responding to the regulator. Bottom line is the sector is rapidly changing. Your sector is rapidly changing. I don't believe the financial service sector as a whole will be the same that it is now in 3 years and 5 years. And I think you need a regulator. It needs a regulator. British Columbia needs a regulator that is keeping up with, and in some places even leading that change in terms of the focus and where we are applying our resources. Next slide, please. So one thing I just want to make clear is the model that the government has put into place here. Again, the Crown Transition Project and the 1FSR project, they are government run projects. So, some of the decisions, a lot of the decisions actually went all the way up to the minister level for ultimate approval. When you think of the legislation that's in place now, think of a superintendent model. Not a council, not a tribunal, not a board, but a superintendent model. And that superintendent is vested with a lot of powers in the various pieces of legislation. BCFSA has 10 pieces across the whole sector. And what happens is the legislation is drafted in such a way that when a CEO is appointed, and that CEO is appointed by the board of directors, and again, the board of directors are appointed by the government, very similar to the council. Well, exactly the same as the council. But once that CEO is appointed by the board, they immediately become the chief statutory officer under various pieces of legislation. So as appointed as CEO, you immediately become the superintendent of real estate. You immediately become the superintendent of financial institutions, of pensions. You become the register of mortgage brokers, and you become the CEO of QDIC. And that's not a choice that the board has. That is based in a statute, and that was to bring consistency and a superintendent model to bear. Next slide, please. So Bill 8 was the bill that was brought in by the government and then ultimately passed in the spring session and ultimately brought into force on August the 1st. So we started with 3 organizations that had overlapping accountabilities, overlapping oversight. It was complicated. We had 10 statutes, which inconsistent approach to statutory decision making. And ultimately, the result or the hope, the desire is to clarify and establish a regulator with clear accountabilities that will be able to act more efficiently. And I think that's what everyone wants. Next slide, please. So very quickly, in terms of the changes to real estate, there are a lot of not changes, but these are things that I think we just want to highlight for everyone. In the past, you had a council, and that council was appointed by the government. Currently, it's a BCFSA board of directors, and they're appointed by the government. The council used to appoint a CEO of RecBC. Now the board of directors appoint BCFSA CEO, and that individual immediately becomes the superintendent of real estate. The council prior was the statutory decision maker, and obviously that council delegated many of those powers to the CEO. RecBC has been dissolved. There is no more council, and council members, to the extent that they had appointments through the government, they have been rescinded. So in terms of the key takeaway here, you're not going to see the council anymore. You're going to see BCFSA. The superintendent of real estate in the prior regime was unlicensed activities. They could make rules, they could appeal. Again, that's all been consolidated under the BCFSA, and to reduce confusion, to reduce and hopefully increase effectiveness. Hearings were always usually oral. It's clear now that we can use hearings to be in written or in oral form. Next slide, please. So one of the things that have changed, and we're going to hear about this, is the discipline model. And again, with the council disappearing, ceasing to exist, and those powers invested in the superintendent, there had to be changes made. But I think what we're talking about here is, in terms of the conversation that I've had with all of you, I've had with the government, I've had with other participants, there is a desire to make the discipline model more predictable, more consistent, more timely. And we're going to attempt to do that, or work to do that, through a concept of hearing officers. You'll hear a little bit more about that later on. The process has changed, the outcomes have not. And when you think about change throughout the organization, when you think of how licensees deal with BCFSA, we have the same process in place for education. We have the same players in place. You'll see a lot of common same faces, including those on this call. You'll also see those same individuals in education and licensing. Again, those aspects haven't changed on day one. The legislation changed, and therefore the discipline model changed on day one. That being said, what I said to the Vancouver board yesterday, and what I say to all of you, is you've all given me a lot to think about in terms of this sector. What should be the licensing requirements? What should be the education requirements? So, it's not just discipline. We are going to look at, and have conversations with everyone about the totality of where BCFSA engages with licensees, and have those conversations. So I think the next slide is for me to introduce Shanice. So again, I have to step away, but I do welcome the conversation. Please, if there are questions at the end, please, Carmen and others will jot them down, and we'll have a way to get back to you. This is not the first conversation I will have with everyone, and I plan to be, out there and having conversations with the sector, the whole sector, about where BCFSA is and where it's going. But for now, I thank you for your time. I thank you for your attention, and I'll turn it over.
Thank you so much, Blair. Hi, everyone. My name is Shanice Power. I am a program development specialist in the education team under the Regulatory Services Department here at BCFSA. I've been with previously RECBC and now BCFSA for just over 2 years, and I'm heavily involved in the production as well as the development and managing of the continuing education for all real estate professionals. So while I usually work behind the scenes, today I'm excited to be in front of you speaking about our education initiatives. The education team, as all of you know, is still involved in the continued creation of new educational opportunities for real estate professionals, but you may now notice that all of the RECBC branding on all of our continuing education materials has now been updated to BCFSA. So with the amalgamation, UBC will continue to offer our pre-licensing course, which has also been rebranded to reflect BCFSA, but just to make sure there's no changes to the structure of that course or the content as a result of the amalgamation. It has just been updated in regards to the branding to match the BCFSA branding. Next slide, please. So on the other hand, the applied practice course has undergone a refresh that started prior to the amalgamation and was just launched here at the beginning of August. This refresh impacts both the residential APC content and as well as the commercial APC content that will be rolling out this fall. A few updates that were included as part of that refresh to both of the courses include new modules addressing conflicts of interest, as well as anti-money laundering requirements have been added to the online component 1 as their own standalone modules. And the AML module in particular was created because the AML course that we currently offer will no longer be running into 2022. So this material is included in the applied practice course moving forward. In component 3 of the course, you'll see a new managing broker checklist that was added to help provide more structured mentorship, either by you as a managing broker or by experienced real estate professionals who are working with new licensees. And in component 4, we've added a scenario bank so that instructors can choose from a wider variety of topics, depending on the structure needed for the students in that class to add a little bit more of a tailored approach. And additionally, the entire course, both the APC residential as well as the APC commercial, have been thoroughly reviewed and the content updated and refreshed where needed in order to maintain its accuracy. Next slide, please. So in addition to the APC course, we also have the ethics and legal update courses as part of our continuing education portfolio. And our team has been working feverishly on the ethics 2022 as well as legal update 2022, which will both be launching in the first half of the new year. And as always, the development of these courses has been highly collaborative. We've engaged with various stakeholders as well as other industry members as we strive towards creating content that is relevant for all real estate professionals in both of these course offerings. Next slide, please. And then as well, part of the regulatory services department, we have the licensing department, which is continuing with kind of business as usual. The licensing department is now also a part of the regulatory services in regards to the amalgamation. And with the amalgamation, we will see some exciting new things coming out of this department in terms of technology as well as other efficiencies. And one example that previously launched in regards to the efficiencies is the ability to submit online criminal record checks for potential licensees. So there's just one example that has already been implemented, and we'll be seeing new technology and other efficiencies implemented moving forward. And I know that was short but sweet, but now I will pass it over to Bruce McCoubry, one of our practice standards advisors.
Thank you, Shanice. That's great. My name is Bruce McCoubry. I'm one of the practice standards advisors here at the BCFSA. Very glad to be here this morning. So let's just look at some market conduct issues, just an overview of things since the integration. Next slide, please. So in terms of licensee obligations, you'll know that licensee obligations have remained unchanged since integration. So nothing has changed in terms of licensees' legislated obligations or the practice standards. One of the things that you might have already noticed is that there has been a change in the rule numbering. The rules are now referred to as the real estate services rules. And the numbering of those rules had to change because statutes and legislation must follow a specific format, and the real estate services rules as they existed did not. However, having said that, despite the change to the numbering of the rules, the actual wording, the provisions, the requirements of those rules has remained completely unchanged. So, for example, under the old rules, so to speak, the disclosure of interest in trade would have been Rule 5-9. When you go to the new real estate services rules, you'll see that that same rule, which sets out how that disclosure of interest in trade must be made, is now Rule 53. And one of the tools that is available on the real estate services rules page to assist you to compare the new numbering to the old numbering, at the top of that page, the real estate services rules page, is what's called a table of concordance. You'll see a link to it there, and it just very clearly sets out a table where you can easily compare the new numbering to the old numbering, which will help you find your way around a little easier. Next slide, please. So in terms of the investigation process, the complaints and investigation process remains largely the same, with the exception of the role of hearing officers, which we'll come to shortly. And in terms of our BCFSA investigation team, just a high-level review of what they are and what they do. They review and investigate matters to obtain and evaluate evidence, and then they'll refer those matters for direction or decision. So that's the broadest possible, summary of what the investigation team is doing. And the outcomes of those investigations can include both disciplinary and non-disciplinary actions. So, for example, The outcomes might include, or an outcome might include, the identification of an administrative penalty. It might mean the issuance of a letter of advisement. It could lead to the closure of a file or an undertaking proposal. And the investigation, it can also lead obviously to an investigation report for decisions on next steps, including referral to legal. Now, we don't actually have a member of the market conduct team on the webinar today. I'm here in their place. So if you do have very specific questions about the investigation and complaint process, feel free to send us those questions. However, we will address them after the webinar once we forward them to the relevant person. And next slide, please. Okay, so the role of hearing officers. Now, the first thing to say here is just the information here is really an overview. We will be announcing more information on the role of hearing officers in the near future. So the hearing officer, the role here is that they have the delegated authority for discipline decisions and administrative penalty reconsideration. The hearing officer will have a specialized knowledge of administrative law, conduct of hearings and regulatory requirements. And hearing officers may be internal or external to BCFSA. Compensation fund decisions will be made by hearing officers through a mainly written process. Now, you might recall that this change is different from the hearing committee approach that we had under Rec BC. It was a hearing panel which was appointed from members of council, which was convened to conduct the hearing on behalf of Rec BC. So that has now changed, and there will be a hearing officer instead. And as I say, we will be providing more information on that role and that process in due course. Next slide, please. So as Blair said, the discipline outcomes remain the same. Those are, for example, license cancellation or suspension, fines now up to $250,000 for individuals or $500,000 for brokerages and corporations. There is an administrative penalty regime with a maximum of up to $100,000 in penalty. There is disgorgement, remedial education, conditions on the license, and of course enforcement costs payable to BCFSA. Next slide, please. So you may be aware, and Sarah will talk a little bit more about this later, that there are new consumer guides that are being added to the website. I won't steal too much of Sarah's thunder, but just to say that those consumer guides, more of them will be added to the website. They are designed to help licensees provide more information to their clients on certain topics. So for example, if licensees want to provide more information, or if consumers have more information, they can direct them to the consumer guides on our website. The regulatory information and guidelines in our knowledge base, which I'm hoping you are now all aware of, will continue probably to remain your workhorse resource that you're going to be referring to. That regulatory information and the guidelines remains unchanged, and you'll see it's still in its format as it was prior to the integration. There are regulatory training tools for managing brokers, which have been added to the website in the knowledge base, and of course practice standards advisors. We're here to provide you confidential information regarding the practice of real estate licensees and real estate professionals. We do that by phone and email, and obviously you can reach us by both methods. So that's it from me, and I will be handing it over to Sarah, Director of Communications.
Thank you, Bruce. Good morning, everybody. I'm Sarah Lusk, as Bruce mentioned. I'm the Director of Communications here at BCFSA, and I'm pleased to share with you some deliverables we have planned over the course of the next few months and to introduce you to our new team. Next slide, please. We are now a nimble team of 10. We currently have 2 vacancies for communications specialists that we're actively recruiting for. The team is organized primarily based on skill and expertise, with Tina leading digital communication side, which includes the website, social media, branding, graphic design, and with Warren's team focused on media relations, external and internal communications, as well as regulatory communications items such as advisories, reports, and consumer education content. We have a varied skill set in our team, and with those that have expert copywriting skills to video production. So we're really well versed to handle all communications needs for this new larger organization, not only communication for our internal team, but also stakeholders in the public. We also work closely with the education and stakeholder engagement teams to develop a wide variety of materials for licensees as well as consumers. Next slide, please. One of the recent initiatives, as mentioned previously by Bruce, was around consumer guides. These are really valuable resources that can be used by both licensees and consumers to provide guidance on a number of topics. For instance, when a licensee is dealing with a complicated legal concept and perhaps they need to try to explain why personal information is required to a consumer, these can really help. They're written in simple, plain language. Also, these are not coming from the licensee directly, but rather from the regulator. So this can help to boost confidence and education across the board. Recent topics are noted on the slide. They include trust funds, privacy concerns, and complementary services to transactions such as measurements. These are easily accessible on a new website. You simply just use the search bar at the top and type in the words consumer guides, and the full list of what we have on offer will come up. Next slide, please. In the coming months, the communications team will be continuing to distribute our bi-weekly brokers briefs to managing brokers, as well as ensuring the cadence of these webinars continue. We'll be further looking to promote these webinars moving forward on our website and welcome any input that you might have into future topics you would like to see. Next slide, please. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen our new website. This was the biggest project of our amalgamation by bringing 3 sites together into one. We're seeing really good traffic and have received lots of good feedback on the new site. That will be said, though, we are continuing to fix bugs and broken links in the weeks to come, along with making other improvements. So we thank you for your patience as we work through these. We do know that on occasion there's some broken links out there, but we are doing our utmost to fix those and improve the site on a daily basis. The knowledge base and the clauses are still present on the new website and are now simpler to access and sort with a new index at the topics page, which you can see there. Next slide, please. Newsletters. Many of you will remember the Report from Council newsletter, and it is undergoing a revamp at the moment to reflect the new organization, but content should remain relatively similar, and it'll be rolled out in the coming months under a new name. As you just touching on this as well, you will have seen that the organization BCFSA has undergone new branding. This means we have an updated logo and new colors, which we're beginning to roll out in a variety of different collateral and forms. Another project that we're looking at moving forward is the new buyer and seller guide that we hope to have out early in the new year. Next slide, please. Lastly, we encourage all of you to follow our new social media channels, which have been updated since August 1. We're on Twitter and Facebook as BCFSA Official, as noted here, and please make sure to follow us also on LinkedIn as BC Financial Services Authority. We do share lots of news and interesting posts on there, so encourage you to follow us as the old sites are no longer in use. I think that's it for me, but I'll hand back to Carmen now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and to everybody. So we do have a little bit of time for some questions and answers, and I see a few in the Q&A that I'll attack right now. And if there's any more, please go ahead and put those in that Q&A function rather than the chat function. First question we have here, are strata developers and home builders who do not engage realtors or brokers regulated under BCFSA? Thank you, Blake, for the question. So BCFSA regulates developers as defined under REDMA, so under the Real Estate Development and Marketing Act. We do regulate that that side of things. However, home builders, if you're talking about owner builders, which I think is probably the direction that you're going towards, that's actually regulated by what you used to know as Consumer Protection BC, and I believe they're now called BC Housing. So that isn't our bailiwick, but developers under REDMA are. The next question, are the Rec BC rules valid and enforced under BCFSA? Fred, I noticed that you put this at the beginning of the webinar, and I think that question's probably been answered for you. As Blair explained, there were changes made so that BCFSA does have powers under RESA, as well as what you knew as the council rules that are now the real estate services rules. But as Bruce said, your obligations under those rules remain largely unchanged. So I think we probably answered that one for you. And another one from Fred, does BCFSA have licensee advisors like what Rec BC had before? Again, we probably answered that as well. Yes, your practice standards advisors are still available, and they are the same advisors that you've all come to know and love, and can be reached absolutely if you have any questions or are looking for any guidance with respect to an issue that you might be having. I don't see anything more in the Q&A, but certainly if there's something you think of later, reach out to one of our professional standards advisors if you have any questions at all. It was an absolute pleasure. I hope you all enjoyed, and we hope to see you at the next webinar. Thanks so much for joining us.